Hello Internet, Skorkowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Conan adventure, The Thousand Eyes of Aumag-Bel. Written by Richard August, the scenario appears in the 2017 collection Jeweled Thrones of the Earth. The adventure is short, just 17 pages, and features that amazing art that Modiphius has been known for. It also takes place in an urban environment, which is what drew me toward it. It does require some Game Master preparation for the necessary foreshadowing long before the game begins. So while yes, this could work as a first scenario, it's best if it's not a first scenario and the foreshadowing has already been done on a previous adventure. The scenario dives deep into the history of the Hyborian world, which my players love. The lore of Conan is very rich, and my players have an affinity for their characters learning all the lost and the forgotten histories.
That is your fault. We played Call of Cthulhu for so long that just investigating the history of things, that's part of our SOP now. You can take the investigation out of the game, but you are not taking the investigator out of the player.
So what we'll do is I'm going to give my thoughts and my criticisms and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this scenario.
And by crumb, I'm Jack the NPC. I'm going to give this one to you from a player's side of things, as well as telling you the story about what I did to the jerk who spilled my beer.
But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players out there, if you have any interest in ever experiencing this game, please stop now. But send your game master this way to see if the Thousand Eyes of Aumag-Bel will be a good fit for your group. Okay, disclaimers out of the way, let's get this thing started. The Thousand Eyes of Aumag-Bel begins before the beginning of the actual adventure. One of the PCs will need to have a strange amulet with this symbol on it. The player must know about this amulet. Maybe it was given to them by their patron, a deceased parent, maybe they discovered it on a previous adventure. The hard part is making it something that they wouldn't just outright sell and they would have instead kept for themselves. For my game, the character acquired the amulet after killing an evil sorcerer 2 adventures prior. Being a sorcerer himself and a collector of strange amulets, he decided to keep it, which is what I was hoping for. He could discern that it was enchanted, but his lore checks and whatnot wasn't able to reveal anything else about the amulet, but it was something that he wanted to keep. Next, you're going to need to decide on a city that the scenario takes place in. The module leaves this completely up to the game master, but I do suggest that you choose a place that none of the PCs are actually from, and none of the player characters have been to before or they're familiar with. That way they already aren't familiar with the symbol or of the story of Aumag-Bel, or at least they're not going to look at you and go, well, wouldn't my character know all this stuff? For my game, I chose the city of Eruk in the land of Shem. I chose it because it's an ancient city where the oldest parts have been carved out of the living mountain, similar to Petra, and no one knows anything about the people who originally built it, and I like the way that was able to work into the plot. The scenario begins after a round of carousing. The player characters are enjoying themselves in a tavern when an arrow comes flying out of nowhere and sticks into their table. For my game, I decided that that arrow was actually going to knock the tankard out of one of the player characters' hands. Surprised, they turn to see a group of armed men standing at the door, one of them demanding that they surrender the amulet and Aumag-Bel will let them live.
Okay, 1, I don't know who that is. And 2, one of you jerks owes me a drink.
This should lead to a rousing fight. Now, one thing I do want to mention is while the module specifically states that one of these men has a bow, the stats that are given for these men does not include a bow as a weapon that any of them have. After the fight, the player characters will notice that all these men have a tattoo that has the same symbol on it as the amulet. They're also going to be told by the tavern keep to leave because he doesn't want Aumag-Bel's wrath to fall on him too.
Again, I don't know who that is. And does this mean you're not going to serve me another drink? That dead guy back there spilled my last one.
The characters all learn that Aumag-Bel is the shadow ruler of the city, and if they value their lives, they should flee his oncoming wrath. Once they leave the tavern, they're going to quickly realize that they're now social pariahs, people avoiding them, many of the vendors refusing to do business with them altogether.
Holy crap! Will nobody in this crappy town serve me a drink?
If they wish, they can now travel around the city, talking to different scholars and learning all they can about this supposedly deathless wizard. Also, they're going to begin noticing that symbol that's on the amulet is carved on different walls. Some of those carvings ancient or sometimes just chalked on the ground, meaning that it's recent. Here I suggest allowing the player characters to make lore tests. While they might not have had any success making lore tests when they initially got the amulet, now that they have a name and a place that's associated with it. They've got a little bit more information, so you can allow a lore test, and maybe they can remember some long-forgotten story that they heard in their younger years, and that way they can find out more from this using their own stats and skills. This part requires a great deal of game master improvisation and roleplay on your part. Maybe the player characters are going to be passing back and forth between different scholars and scroll sellers, trying to learn more about it, and all the while they're getting all these kind of dirty looks and frightened looks from the citizens of the city, and this might require some insight tests in order to gauge what their intentions are when all these people are looking at them. Is it fear, or is it that they're possibly going to attack them? However, the module makes this part of the scenario kind of written out awkwardly, where the scene with the children at the gates and at the market are split, and in between those spots is all the information on what the player characters can learn while they're researching. So now you're going to be flipping back and forth because this scene is kind of hidden in the middle. So game masters, definitely prepare your notes before you run this adventure, because the module layout I find a bit awkward, so you want to go ahead and prep beforehand. That way it kind of flows smoothly and naturally whenever you run it yourself. Also, during this time, or at the very opening of the game, like even before they get that arrow shot at them, you might want to have mention to the player characters that there's been a kidnapping in a city. Rumors that a merchant prince's daughter has been kidnapped and a fantastic reward is being offered. So you could make it where the player characters were initially looking and hopefully rescuing this missing woman, and then an arrow shoots into their table and now they're thrust into a different adventure. And this is all going to become important later on, but if you foreshadow the kidnapped woman early on, it's going to feel a lot less random later on in this adventure when they encounter her. Maybe during their research of Aumag-Bel later on, they're going to hear whisperings and rumors that maybe Aumag-Bel was behind the kidnapping of the woman, so now the player characters know that these two plots are intersecting and becoming one. Eventually the player characters are going to be accosted by a group of street urchins who are going to try to rob them, and this is all going to lead to a merry chase throughout the city. Again, we're going to have a lot of improvisation on your part, and we get a few ideas as far as possible obstacles you can use, but depending on if your player characters are on foot or if they're mounted or exactly where they are in the city, it's going to be different for every group, so just be prepared to do a lot of improvisation. Now, one aspect that I love about this is that the thief children are going to be tossing this amulet back and forth as the player characters are closing in on them. So you got a player character, he runs up behind a kid, he grabs him, and right before he can grab the kid tosses it away, another kid snatches it up and goes darting down a side alley. And then these kids could lay booby traps for him, like, a kid runs down an alley, and then two more on the other side pull a rope taut. Now the player character has to make a roll to avoid, tripping over this rope or different things like that. This can kind of lengthen the time that this chase takes place, give it a lot of depth, and make it a whole lot of fun. Eventually, either by capturing one of the kids and interrogating him, or just following the kids because they weren't able to capture them, they're going to be led to a seedy black lotus den, and from there they're going to be led to the tunnels that lead deeper and deeper underneath the city. They'll encounter some guards, some monstrous horrors made from those who mutated by serving Aumag-Bel too long, and they're going to get lost in a magically darkened labyrinth and eventually come into a well-lit ancient palace deep beneath the earth. The module gives us some great world history in the murals along the walls here that's going to show the different times before man, when all was ruled by this ancient race of worm creatures, and then eventually by some sort of serpent people. Again, my players took a whole lot of interest here. I feel that the module really wasted a great opportunity here by not suggesting any sort of lore checks to allow the player characters to glean more information, maybe learn more about this worm race, any sort of other rumors that they may have heard, more about the serpent people, and a little bit more as to what this amulet does.
Oh yeah, we were collecting bits of pottery and taking notes the whole way through this place. Lore checks are one of those things that sets the Conan game apart from other fantasy RPGs. It is a wonderful aspect, and this place is a spectacular place for your players to be using it. Maybe you could also throw in some sort of relic or map or something like that that could then lead them on to the next adventure.
Eventually, after a few more combats with these monstrous horror servants, we're going to come to the Great Temple Room, where the evil sorcerer Aumag-Bel has the kidnapped woman Durgar-Sheev laid out on an altar before her as he's doing a menacing pose with some sort of spike. After a brief and villainous monologue on his part, the fight is going to be on. Now, one thing that I really wish here is that we had a map of this room as far as where everyone is situated. I would have really found that handy, but the module description is good enough that you can draw it out yourself, but a map would have made that a whole lot easier. Now, Aumag-Bel's powers are kind of lackluster. He can only attack one player character at a time, and the doom costs for his magical spells are going to add up extremely quickly. So Game Masters, prior to this combat, start saving your doom up. Otherwise, you're going to run out of doom just pretty much right once this fight begins. And you might want to consider turning his Clutch of the Earth spell into an area of effect sort of spell. That way he can get 2 or 3 player characters in one go versus just attacking them all one at a time. Kind of depends on how large your group is. Now, eventually his body is going to be destroyed and Aumag-Bel will appear to die. Then his ragged corpse is going to come springing back up and the hideous worm inside of him is going to burst out for one final attempt to get a new host.
Now, one thing that doesn't make any sense in this adventure is why Aumag-Bel had to kidnap that woman even to begin with. I mean, if he just needs a new host body, he's got all these gods and all these kids and he could just take over one of them, right? So why specifically her? Now, my suggestion here is while the player characters are going through the ruined temple and they're reading all these murals and all that stuff and hopefully making those lore checks, they can find out that the perfect host for Aumag-Bel must meet all these specific criteria, such as born under the right stars and stuff like that. And that's the reason that Aumag-Bel specifically chose her.
Once Aumag-Bel is destroyed, the adventure is over. If Durga Shiv is still alive, she can be returned to her father for a fantastic reward. However, if she's killed, the player characters might have made themselves a new enemy with this merchant prince. Returning to the city with the news of Aumag-Bel's death, probably spread around faster by all the different street urchin children that are no longer under his control, the player characters should be treated as honored heroes. While there is no mention of the adventure of them getting a renown increase for this, Game Masters, I suggest that you either give them a little bit of renown or make it easier for them to earn some renown as they're spreading tales of their heroics while doing their carousing phase at the end of this scenario.
That's all well and good and all, but what treasure did Aumag-Bel have? Like, how rich are we now?
There's actually no mention of that. It says that the amulet can be sold for a goodly sum, but there's not even a hint as to what a goodly sum is.
No treasure? This guy was supposed to be the shadow ruler of the city. He lived in a freaking palace, for crom's sake, and had an entire army of all these gods and all these kids working for him, and he had lived for centuries. Are you telling me there is not so much as a gold candlestick I can yoink here?
Sorry. Game Masters, I suggest that you do add some treasure here. After all, Aumag-Bel was this fantastic secret ruler of the city for centuries. Maybe you can give some observation rolls to help them find something that they can carry out of here. Maybe some thievery rolls as they're trying to pry different gemstones out of statues or parts of the wall. Now, one idea is that upon Aumag-Bel's death, the powers that were keeping this underground temple intact, those are now gone, and the temple of the ground begins shaking and trembling, and it looks like the place is going to start falling down on them, and the player characters are going to have to race out of here. This can lead to a daring escape, and any complications you have during the escape, they might trip and fall and lose some of the treasure and everything that they're finding like that, and they're on this race to get out alive. But that way we can have Aumag-Bel be wealthy, but it allows the player characters to get a little bit of that wealth without it suddenly becoming a game imbalancing amount of loot that they get from it if you give them unlimited time to go ahead and ransack his palace. Overall, we had a ton of fun with this adventure. Game Masters are just going to need to do the right amount of foreshadowing and pre-work to let the player characters get this amulet and maybe hear about this kidnapped woman before those actually come into play in the adventure. That way the players feel that they're a little bit invested in the story going on and everything feels a little less random. Be ready to do an incredible amount of improvisation and definitely add and make use of different skills when they're finding out about stuff in the city, such as lore, persuade, society, insight, and other non-combat skills as the player characters are trying to find out more. Well, there certainly is a lot of combat in this adventure. I think that the strength and the potential for the Thousand Eyes of Aumag-Bel really comes from all the different skills that the player characters don't get to use as much in any of the other scenarios that have been published so far for Conan, and that's really what sets it aside and puts it above a lot of the other stuff that's out there so far. But for my players and I, we had a lot of fun with it.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our videos, such as game reviews or Game Master Toolbox, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, heroes, you have a great day. Finally, I have been waiting for this all day.